The seeds of rebellion 1763-1774. I was there, in the streets of Boston, when everything started to fall apart. My name is Thomas Whitmore, and I worked as a merchant in the 13 colonies during the most turbulent years of our history. You need to understand, it wasn't a single moment that transformed us into rebels. It was a succession of humiliations, injustices, laws that tightened around our necks until we couldn't breathe anymore. Everything changed after 1763, when England finally defeated France in the 7 Years' War. You might be thinking, but Thomas, that was a victory. And it was, but it cost the British Treasury dearly. And guess who they decided would foot the bill? Us, the colonists. People who bled alongside the Redcoats, who defended the frontiers, who built their lives on this land. The Sugar Act came in 1764, raising taxes on molasses and sugar. Then came the Stamp Act in 1765, damned law. Every document, every newspaper, every contract needed an official British stamp, and it was expensive. But the worst part wasn't the money, it was the principle. None of us had representation in the British Parliament. Taxation without representation is tyranny. This cry echoed through every tavern from Boston to Charleston. I saw Samuel Adams speak at the Green Dragon Tavern. His words were fire. The Sons of Liberty formed, and we organized protests that actually worked. The Stamp Act was repealed in 1766. We thought we'd won, but Parliament sent the Townshend Acts in 1767, taxing glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea. British soldiers occupied Boston in 1768. 2 years later, on March 5, 1770, I witnessed something that changed everything. A crowd taunted guards near the Custom House. Shots rang out. 5 men lay dead in the snow. The Boston Massacre sealed our hatred. For 3 years, an uneasy peace held. Then came the Tea Act of 1773. On December 16th, I joined dozens of men at Griffin's Wharf. We disguised ourselves as Mohawk Indians and dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. 90,000 pounds worth. The water turned brown with it. Parliament's response was brutal. The Intolerable Acts of 1774 closed Boston Harbor, revoked our Massachusetts charter, and banned town meetings. But they made one critical mistake. They thought punishing Massachusetts would isolate us. Instead, it united us. The First Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia with delegates from 12 colonies. We weren't talking about independence yet. Most of us still considered ourselves loyal British subjects. But the foundation was laid. As 1774 ended, both sides were preparing militias drilled on village greens. General Thomas Gage fortified Boston. The question wasn't if conflict would come, it was when. Don't miss part 2, where I'll tell you about the shots heard round the world. Subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single moment of this incredible true story of how a ragtag group of colonists dared to challenge the greatest empire on earth. Part 2. The shot heard round the world. 1775, April 18th, 1775. I'll remember that night until my dying day. Paul Revere and William Dawes rode into the darkness, shouting warnings. General Gage had ordered 700 soldiers to march to Concord to seize our military supplies and arrest Samuel Adams and John Hancock. But we knew, we always knew. By dawn on April 19th, 77 militiamen stood on Lexington Green. The Redcoats arrived at sunrise. Disperse, the rebels. Major Pitcairn shouted. Then a shot. Nobody knows who fired first, but that single shot began a war. 8 colonists died. The British marched to Concord. At Concord's North Bridge, 400 militiamen faced British infantry. Fire. Fellow soldiers, for God's sake, fire. Major Buttrick ordered. We fired. British soldiers fell. The Redcoats retreated. The march back to Boston became 16 miles of hell for those Redcoats. Militiamen fired from behind stone walls, trees, buildings. The British suffered nearly 300 casualties. We lost 93 men. Within days, 20,000 militia surrounded Boston. The most powerful military force in the world was trapped by farmers with muskets. On June 15th, Congress chose George Washington as commander. Before he arrived, the bloodiest battle yet occurred at Bunker Hill on June 17th. The British took the hill, but lost over 1,000 men. We lost 450. They learned we could fight. Washington organized the Continental Army through fall and winter. In November, young Colonel Henry Knox accomplished the impossible. he transported 60 tons of artillery from Fort Ticonderoga, 300 miles through snow and ice. By March 1776, we had cannon positioned on Dorchester Heights, overlooking Boston. General Howe had two choices: attack with massive casualties or evacuate. On March 17th, the British abandoned Boston, our first major victory. The story gets even more intense. Part 3 reveals the birth of a nation and the darkest days of the war. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next in this epic tale of courage and sacrifice. Part 3, Independence and Disaster, 1776. Throughout early 1776, sentiment was shifting. Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, spread like wildfire. Everything that is right or natural pleads for separation. He wrote, "The blood of the slain, the weeping voice of nature cries, 'tis time to part." On July 4, 1776, Congress approved the Declaration of Independence. I heard it read aloud in Philadelphia. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." We weren't fighting for British rights anymore. We were fighting for human rights. We'd gone from rebels to revolutionaries. But declaring independence and winning it were different matters. By August, the British were ready. General Howe arrived in New York with 32,000 soldiers, 10,000 sailors, 400 ships. Washington had 19,000 men, mostly militia. We were outnumbered, outgunned, outtrained. The Battle of Long Island on August 27th was disaster. We lost over 1,000 men. Washington's army was trapped against the East River. But that night, Washington executed one of the most brilliant retreats in military history. Using every boat, in fog and darkness, we evacuated 9,000 men across the river. By dawn, we'd vanished, but the British kept coming. We retreated across New Jersey. By December, we were in Pennsylvania. My boots had holes. Men wrapped their feet in rags that left bloody footprints in the snow. The army was melting away. Washington knew we needed a victory or the revolution would die. Christmas night, 1776, we crossed the ice-choked Delaware River in a blizzard. The password was victory or death. We marched 9 miles through snow and attacked Trenton at dawn. Within 90 minutes, we'd won. 900 Hessians captured. We lost 4 men. On January 3rd, we attacked Princeton, defeating British regulars. 2 victories weren't strategic game changers, but psychologically, everything we proved we could win. Men re-enlisted. France began secretly sending supplies. As winter settled in, the British controlled cities, but we controlled the countryside. The war is just heating up. Part 4 reveals foreign allies, brutal battles, and the winter that almost destroyed us. Hit subscribe and the notification bell. This is one historical journey you don't want to miss. Part 4, The World at War 1777-1778. The British developed a strategy for 1777. General Burgoyne would march south from Canada. General Howe would march north from New York. They'd meet at Albany, cutting New England off. In execution, it was disaster. Howe decided to capture Philadelphia instead. He defeated us at Brandywine Creek on September 11th and marched into Philadelphia on September 26th. We attacked at Germantown on October 4th but retreated in the fog. Another defeat. But while Howe sat comfortably in Philadelphia, Burgoyne was in serious trouble up north. His supply lines stretched thin. At Bennington, militia destroyed a foraging party. By September, Burgoyne reached Saratoga, facing our forces under General Gates and Benedict Arnold. On October 17, 1777, Burgoyne surrendered his entire army, nearly 6,000 men. Saratoga changed everything. Benjamin Franklin had been in Paris begging France for support. France needed proof we could win. Saratoga was that proof. On February 6, 1778, France officially allied with us. What started as colonial rebellion became a world war. But before French help arrived, we endured hell. Winter 1777-78, at Valley Forge, 12,000 men in frozen wasteland. No proper shelters, no adequate food. Men boiled their shoes for leather. Typhus, typhoid, dysentery swept through camp. 2,000 died that winter from neglect, but something miraculous happened. Baron Friedrich von Steuben, a Prussian officer, arrived and drilled us every day. He taught us to march in formation, load and fire precisely, use bayonets effectively. We went into Valley Forge, a mob with guns. We left an army. When the British abandoned Philadelphia in June 1778, we pursued them. At Monmouth Courthouse on June 28th, in 100-degree heat, we fought them to a draw. We met British regulars in open battle and held our ground. The war's character was changing. In the north, it became stalemate. Instead, the war moved south, bringing the conflict's most bitter fighting. The climax is approaching. Part 5 reveals brutal civil war in the south and the battles that would determine our fate. Don't miss it. Subscribe now and turn on all notifications. Part 5, Civil War in the South, 177-81780. The war in the South became neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother. It was brutal, personal, a civil war within a revolution. The British captured Savannah in December 1778, then Charleston in May 1780. Over 5,000 Americans surrendered, the worst defeat of the war. The British thought they'd won the South, but their campaign of terror turned the population against them. Guerrilla fighters emerged. Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, Thomas Sumter, Andrew Pickens. They struck British supply lines and vanished into wilderness. British officer Banastre Tarleton had a reputation for killing men who surrendered. At Waxhaws on May 29th, Tarleton's dragoons slaughtered over 100 Virginians. Tarleton's quarter meant no quarter at all. Congress sent General Gates to save the South. On August 16th at Camden, Gates faced Cornwallis. The battle was disaster. Gates fled 170 miles in 3 days. His reputation was destroyed. By late 1780, the British controlled Georgia and South Carolina. Then we discovered betrayal. Benedict Arnold, hero of Saratoga, had been secretly negotiating with the British. He planned to surrender West Point for money and a commission. His contact was captured. Arnold escaped to British lines and became a British general, leading cruel raids against us. But General Nathaniel Greene took command in the South in December 1780. He understood he couldn't defeat Cornwallis directly. Instead, he'd make Cornwallis chase him, exhaust his army. Greene sent Daniel Morgan west. Cornwallis sent Tarleton to destroy him. They met at Cowpens on January 17, 1781. Morgan positioned militia in front, told them to fire 2 volleys, then retreat. When the British rushed forward, they hit the Continental line. Then our cavalry hit their flank. Perfect double envelopment. Tarleton lost over 800 men. Cornwallis chased Greene across North Carolina in the race to the Dan. Both armies marched through winter. Greene reached Virginia first, safely across the Dan River. Then he turned around and came back. They fought at Guilford Courthouse on March 15th. Cornwallis won but lost a quarter of his army. Cornwallis limped to Wilmington to rest. Greene marched back into South Carolina and recaptured post after post. The British were pushed to Charleston and Savannah. Cornwallis made a fateful decision. He'd marched to Virginia instead of returning to Charleston. He was about to walk into the trap that would end the war. The final chapter is here. Part 6 reveals the siege that changed history and the birth of a nation. Subscribe and enable notifications. You absolutely cannot miss the epic conclusion. Part 6, Yorktown and Victory 1781-1783. Cornwallis had 7,000 men in Virginia by summer 1781. British commander Clinton ordered him to establish a naval base on the coast. Cornwallis chose Yorktown on the Virginia Peninsula, where the York River met the Chesapeake Bay. It seemed safe. British ships could protect and supply him. But Cornwallis didn't know what was coming. Washington was in New York with Continental and French troops under Rochambeau. He got a message that changed everything. A French fleet under Admiral de Grasse was sailing to the Chesapeake. If de Grasse controlled the bay, Cornwallis would be trapped. Washington made a brilliant deception. He left troops in New York with fake camps. Clinton stayed put, convinced Washington would attack him. Meanwhile, Washington and Rochambeau force marched south, over 400 miles in 15 days. I was with that march. When we reached Virginia in mid-September, de Grasse's fleet was already in Chesapeake Bay. The British Navy arrived on September 5th to challenge de Grasse. The Battle of the Chesapeake wasn't decisive, but the British withdrew to New York. Cornwallis was cut off. By late September, we had Cornwallis surrounded. Washington commanded 8,000 Americans. Rochambeau had 7,000 French. French ships blocked the bay. Cornwallis had 7,000 soldiers trapped with nowhere to go. The siege began September 28, 1781. We dug trenches closer to British fortifications. Artillery pounded Yorktown day and night. On October 14th, we assaulted two key redoubts. Alexander Hamilton led 400 men against Redoubt 10. I was there, carrying ammunition. In 10 minutes, it was over. We'd taken the redoubt with light casualties. Cornwallis was finished. On October 17th, 4 years after Saratoga, he asked for terms. October 19th, 1781, over 7,000 British soldiers marched out to surrender. Their band played "The World Turned Upside Down." We'd won. Not just a battle, the war. Fighting continued sporadically, but Britain's will was broken. When news reached London, Prime Minister Lord North exclaimed, "Oh God, it is all over." Peace negotiations began in Paris. Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay negotiated brilliantly. On September 3, 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Britain recognized American independence. We gained all territory east of the Mississippi River, south of Canada, north of Florida. After 8 years of war, we were free. I watched the last British soldiers evacuate New York on November 25, 1783. Washington rode into the city in triumph. We'd done the impossible. A collection of colonies had defeated the world's greatest empire. We'd created something new, the United States of America. The cost was enormous. Over 25,000 Americans died. Thousands more were wounded or impoverished. But we'd proven something revolutionary, that people could govern themselves, that liberty was worth fighting for, that ordinary citizens could stand against tyranny and win. Washington resigned his commission on December 23, 1783, returning to Mount Vernon. King George III said, "If Washington did that, he will be the greatest man in the world." In Europe, rulers held power until death. Washington gave it up voluntarily, establishing the principle of civilian control. The war was over, but the revolution continued. We had independence, but needed to build a nation. The Articles of Confederation proved too weak. In 1787, we gathered in Philadelphia to write a constitution. We created a system of checks and balances, of federalism, of individual rights. Not everyone was free. Slavery remained, a cancer that would nearly destroy us 80 years later. Women couldn't vote. Native Americans were pushed westward. The revolution's promises of equality were only partially fulfilled, but the foundation was laid for future generations to expand those rights. I'm an old man now, telling these stories to my grandchildren. They ask if it was worth it, all that suffering. I tell them, we didn't fight for perfection. We fought for the possibility of perfection. We created a nation where people could debate, protest, vote, change their government peacefully, where rights mattered more than birth. Was it worth it? Ask yourself, would you rather live under a king or govern yourself? Would you rather have rights granted by a monarch's whim or guaranteed by written law? The American Revolution wasn't just about independence from Britain. It was about the revolutionary idea that government exists to serve the people, not the other way around. That idea changed the world. France had its revolution in 1789, Latin America in the 1800s, colonies across the globe in the 1900s. The American Revolution proved that people could throw off tyranny and build something better. We weren't perfect. We were human, flawed, contradictory, but we tried. And sometimes, trying is enough to change history. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through the American Revolution. If you enjoyed this series, please subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and share it with anyone who loves history. Drop a comment below, telling me what surprised you most about this story. History isn't just dates and battles, it's real people making impossible choices that shaped our world. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next historical adventure. Until next time, remember, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance.